you. I really appreciate you inviting me. It does help to be Ukrainian when you're trying to talk about Ukraine.
That's right.
And I really appreciate all of your interest. What I'm going to try to do today is briefly and superficially, so to say, because the topic is much bigger than the time allows, to talk to you about Ukraine, a little bit of Ukrainian culture and the Ukrainians who have contributed in one way or another to the development of culture, politics, and civil life here in the United States. Before I get started on that, one of the big elements of Ukrainian culture, something that we're very much known for, is our hospitality, whether we're hosting people or going somewhere, which for me is both. It's almost as if I'm hosting you, but I'm coming to be your guest and your speaker. We never go anywhere without snacks. That's one thing. If you want to learn about Ukrainians, we never go anywhere without snacks. So my mother's luggage over this Christmas break was absolutely overweight with all the food that she has brought that I am very glad to share with you. And these are some of the Ukrainian cookies. If you could pass this around the room, please, I would appreciate that. And please, at the end of our session, I'm sure we'll have some question and answer time. However, please come up to the table and look at some of the things that I have here, the Ukrainian flag, and some of the examples of traditional Ukrainian embroidery, some of the wedding dolls. These amazing pieces of art were made as a Christmas gift for me by my aunt. It took her about 4 months to accomplish these things. So please come and have a look, and I tried to represent as much as I could the Ukrainian flag as well as the Ukrainian traditional embroidery in my outfit today. So just to get started, I wanted to say thank you so much to the library as well as to the International Studies program for making these things happen. Usually when I would do such talks or lectures a few years ago, I would say, I would like to tell you about Ukraine today, and I would get started with explaining to people what is Ukraine and where it is. I don't have to do that anymore because everybody knows where Ukraine is and what it is, and it's on everybody's mind. Just to give you a little bit of an explanation who I am and where I come from. I was born in a small town a little bit outside Kyiv, but was raised in Kyiv. That's where my heart is. You probably know that this is the main square with the Statue of Independence in the middle, but you are probably more familiar with seeing it like this. So that's a little bit of a change of a scenery, and we'll touch upon that closer to the end of my talk. But this is the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, which is one of the largest educational institutions. Is where I got my undergraduate degree in commercial tourism from the Department of Geography. My very first year was when the Orange Revolution broke out, so we skipped class to go and be at the Orange Revolution and wave flags for the Ukrainian democracy. So the ideas of peaceful protest and sort of explaining and demonstrating your opinion and having some sort of commotion going on in Kyiv is very well familiar to me. And then I decided to, give a little bit of a more of international worldview on what was going on, applied to grad school in the United States, and got into East Carolina University. So I made a real good move to where it was warmer. And then I basically screwed myself over and moved back up north and got my PhD at Penn State. I learned the hard way, I learned my mistake, and now I'm back down south here in Georgia Southern, where it's a lot better. So to give you a little bit of a background, before I go into these contributions, very little is known about the different waves of Ukrainian immigration in the United States and their contributions. We were never an overwhelming immigrant group in numbers, however, very active throughout its entire history. We're used to thinking now most research in immigration, which is also my research interest, mostly focuses on Latin American immigrants, Asian American immigrants, and those are the two biggest groups. When we're used to talking about the early settlers, we're used to talking about people from Western Europe, Germans, British, French, so forth. There's not as much conversation going on about those from Eastern Europe who came into this country. However, it started fairly early on. If you look at the first documented account of a Ukrainian coming to the United States, it was with Captain John Smith when he came with one of his trips to Jamestown, Virginia. That was the birth of the American nation itself. So it was a really, really long time ago. John Smith himself actually has been to Ukraine, and he has written about Lavrenti Bohun and Ukraine in his diaries, which is a fact that's very little known. If you have ever heard about Fort Ross near San Francisco on the West Coast, that used to be called Fort Rus, from Rusin or Russian, which was a Russian settlement, one of the first Russian settlements in the West Coast that was mostly settled by Ukrainian Cossacks who were displaced into Siberia and then sent to settle the new lands around Alaska and on the West Coast. So that name sort of migrated into being Fort Ross, but there's still a museum there. You still can go and see some of the old buildings and some of the elements of the Slavic culture from the time that the place was settled. Ukrainians have participated in the Civil War, and there were some military leaders who have actually left quite an imprint by serving for the Union Army. For example, General Basil Turchin, aka the Terrible Cossack. You know, you got to do some pretty cool things to earn the nickname of the Terrible Cossack. He was one of the leaders in the Northern Brigade. He was the commander of the Northern Brigade in the Battle of Chickamauga, or if I totally did not say that right, I apologize. So, you know, these are very little known facts about Ukrainians who have actually contributed throughout the history of the United States to its military development, participated in the Civil War, participated in the development of the different towns and regions. And so those are some of the first accounts which mostly talk about the individuals. So we're not talking about waves yet, waves of Ukrainians coming. Some of the other people who also made a large imprint, for example, Dr. Nikolai Sudzilovsky. He arrived in San Francisco around 1880s, and he was a medical doctor. He stayed there for a little bit, and then he actually moved to Hawaii in 1895. The Hawaiian Medical Society that still exists to this day, he was one of the founding members. A Ukrainian immigrant was one of the founding members of the Hawaii Medical Society. A few years later, he was elected to Hawaiian Senate. That is a very high position for that time that was occupied by a Ukrainian immigrant who's only came to the country a few years before. So those are some of the very impressive things that those early immigrants have accomplished. We currently talk about 4 different waves of Ukrainian immigration into the United States, and I wanted to explain a little bit about each. The first one happened around 1870s, and that was when Ukraine was not independent. It was ripped apart, split between the Russian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And most of those immigrants from the western parts of current Ukraine from the Austro-Hungarian Empire were the ones who were trying to go over the Atlantic in search for a better life. So there were usually poor peasant farmers who are unable to make a living and who wanted to go to the United States, to the new world with the new promise, earn some money, come back, buy some land. So it was never sort of this, we're gonna stay forever, which is kind of the way it worked out. They usually were unskilled and illiterate. And because of those reasons, it was very hard for them to accomplish that American dream or the dream life kind of thing that they were hoping for in terms of, you know, getting a lot of money, coming back, and you know, buying land, because most of the kind of employment that they were getting at that time were in northeastern Pennsylvania in the coal mines. So they started out as breaker boys, then being a miner's assistant, and then some of them actually moved on to be a full miner. And you know, that's kind of, that sounds like, you know, they really moved up in life, from breaker boys to the assistant to a miner. That's still very low paid, very long hours, unskilled, illiterate kind of work. So, it was very hard for them to realize the dream for the better future. Some of the other people from this first wave Also, there was a smaller group of Protestant, they were called Stundists, who actually were fleeing religious persecution and who settled in Virginia, North Dakota. At that particular time, there were settling those areas, such as going further west. People were getting certain assistance, and the government was trying to facilitate the settlement of those particular lands. So those people were faring a little bit better than those who were in the coal mines in northeastern Pennsylvania. And fantastically enough, and that's very common, different immigrants, they move, they settle the West, they name their towns with the names that they're used to back home. There's New Amsterdam that became New York. There is, Odessa in Texas, and Moscow and St. Petersburg in Florida. And these Ukrainian immigrants were not an exclusion from the rule. This particular photo shows you a process of harvesting near Kiev, North Dakota. So one of the settlements in one of the villages that these Ukrainian immigrants settled in, they were like, well, Kiev is, big homeland, big city. We're going to call this little village that we'll live in, we're going to name it Kiev. Kiev exists till this day. You can still go to North Dakota. There's about 12 people living there currently. The harsh weather conditions and all of that. But you can, for example, purchase a book that's, that Kiev, North Dakota, 100 years of history that will tell you about the settlement of Kiev by Ukrainians. And that's actually the spelling that was used during the Austro-Hungarian Empire times with the F instead of a V at the end. Another settlement that was also in North Dakota, it was called Ukraina, North Dakota. Ukraina, North Dakota doesn't exist anymore. The only thing you can see is one of the postal stamps. They had a little post station, and it's stamped, 1899, Ukraina, North Dakota. So, and we don't know that much about these places, and it's really something we don't think about a lot. Is that, wow, there's places in these states that are called after places in Ukraine that were basically founded by Ukrainian immigrants and named by them. So, the second wave that came around post World War I, it was about 40,000 people because there were different laws that were prohibiting more individuals coming here. It was a little bit different in its nature. In contrast to the first wave, they came from a place that was already very conscious of its Ukrainian ethno-national heritage. Those Ukrainians who came in the first wave, as I said, they were still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Ukraine was torn apart. They felt Slavic more than specifically Ukrainian. This group that came after World War I, they were aware that they were a separate ethnicity, a separate nation of Ukrainians. They were a lot more politically sophisticated because they were exposed to political processes during World War I and right after World War I that made them aware that they are a separate unit, that they are a separate culture. They were far more literate. The educational system made a huge leap between the two waves that allowed these new immigrants to come in with a much higher level of education. They boomed together with the entire country in the 1920s and suffered with the rest of the country in the Great Depression of 1930s. And this is also around that time when the community and cultural life moved from Pennsylvania. As I said, you think about first wave, Pennsylvania, coal mines, illiterate. The second wave, a lot more literate, so they had better opportunities to move into bigger urban locations such as Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Boston, and Pittsburgh. To these days, you can see the imprint of the cultural elements that were instilled by those people. This is the Ukrainian village in Chicago that you can go and visit, and they have their own bakery, they have their own Ukrainian newspaper. So to this day, it's a hustling and bustling Ukrainian community in the middle of Chicago. And this is the Ukrainian, Little Ukraine in East Village on Manhattan. That's where I went to collect data for my dissertation. There's Ukrainian restaurants, bookstores, souvenir stores, the big Ukrainian museum. There's Taras Shevchenko Street that is in that particular region. So there's 3 streets in New York that are named after big names in Ukrainian history. So these places still exist, and they're still very interesting places to visit. They're still cultural places to visit. The third wave came in after World War II, and it was a little larger in number because after World War II, the United States had certain legislation that was trying to rescue refugees, post-World War II displaced persons, and they were, the Displaced Persons Act was actually the one that allowed a lot of those people from concentration camps, from displaced person camps, come into the United States. This was the first wave to arrive for political reasons, mostly, not religious, not just looking for, for money, to buy land, farmers, anything. These were the people who were very nationalistically conscious, and they were running away from the communists who took over Ukraine after World War II. They knew they were going to be sent to Siberian concentration camps, and they needed to get out. And the already existing diaspora in the United States, working through the Displaced Person Act, helped this third wave make their way into the United States. They were very well educated. They spent most of their life in urban setting. Most of them were college graduates, professionals. It was a very different, these people, this third wave coming in, and that's people who are still alive. Like some of them are 60, 70 years old. You can still talk to them. These are the people who tremendously strengthened the cultural life of the Ukrainian community. With them, they brought so much culture, so much understanding of what it means to be Ukrainian. These people started the organizations that I'm going to mention in a second, started newspapers. Their influx of this fresh blood, Ukrainian blood of the third wave, is really what took off the Ukrainian diasporic life and the Ukrainian diasporic contribution in the US. They mostly settled, again, in large metropolitan areas in East and Midwest, such as Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and Buffalo. Interestingly enough, I just wanted to show you in terms of, political contribution. Mayor Mary Beck of Detroit and Mayor Michael Patrick of Windsor, Ontario, both Ukrainians, meeting on the Ambassador Bridge between the U.S. and Canada. Just to think about, we're talking about the contributions, right, of Ukrainians in the U.S. 2 mayors of 2 towns in different countries meeting, but they're both of Ukrainian heritage. They're both second-generation Ukrainians. And it was very great that it was back in 1954 that they were picked to sort of represent this cultural union between the 2 countries. The fourth wave is the one that I particularly did my dissertation on. These are the people who, just like the first wave, came for economic reasons. They came after 1991 when we had the collapse of the USSR. Ukraine became independent. However, independence was an absolute economic disaster for Ukraine. If you think about USSR policy about taking 15 countries and trying to smash them together and merge them as much as possible into one thing, the one thing you're going to do is you're going to create an economic system that makes these countries dependent on each other. So if you have a production cycle of, steel, manufacturing, take anything, you're going to make sure that step 1 happens in Ukraine, then you take all this stuff to Belarus to step 2, and then you take everything to Russia for step 3. So once the USSR collapsed and all the countries became independent, you can't go through the whole cycle anymore because you don't have step 2, and they don't have step 1, and they don't have step 3. And so putting the economy back into working state was just an absolute, the inflation was crazy. I remember I was like 5 years old, and we moved from whatever one currency was, coupons, to whatever the next currency was, because they just kept inflating, and we had stacks of useless piece of paper in our balcony, and I was making little paper planes out of it and throwing out of the balcony. That was money. That was useless money that inflated so much that you could just let kids play with it. And so these people are educated professionals who were coming to the country again, in a search of better life, in search of better employment opportunities, and who wanted to employ their knowledge and their skills. They were college graduates, but they couldn't find any work in Ukraine. However, what they were faced with is a lot of social demotion and having to take up jobs that were below their skill level, for which most of the reason was lack of knowledge of English. Again, think about USSR, think about Iron Curtain. People weren't going anywhere, they weren't expected to go anywhere, they weren't expected to be allowed to go anywhere, really. Learning English was not a priority. My mom, my uncle, they don't speak English. I bring them here, I read the entire TGI Fridays menu to them before they can pick what they're gonna eat. So it's not even like I can get by kind of level at all. Another part of this wave are students staying in the US after the work and travel program. So it's a J1 visa where you come in and you spend a summer working. I did that 2 summers in a row and then came to school, but a lot of the people who came with me never left and tried to stay in the country. So that's also part of that 4th wave. And so in terms of, there's predictions that there will be a 5th wave that's coming in right now that is pushed out of the country by the worries of the current political situation and civil war and aggression and things like that. So we'll see if that happens. That's just recent events. So in terms of the contributions, just some of the things I wanted to touch upon is some of the contributions into the civic life, into religious life in the United States, and especially in the cultural life. And again, very little is being publicized and known about these contributions, and I'm sure some of the things that I'm going to show you will blow your mind. The real community life and the civic life of most communities kind of back in the early 1900s starts from the church. Community, stems out of the church, and the real Ukrainian community life started when Ivan Volonsky came, the first Ukrainian priest to come to the United States came in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, because remember back in the day that's where all the Ukrainians were in the coal mines there. And later on, more priests came, and 8 of them created what is now called the American Circle. There were these 8 young men that were very determined on building a cohesive Ukrainian community that could make decisions, voice its concerns, voice its needs. They built the Association of Ruthenian Communities that was later renamed, but it was the first national Ukrainian organization in America that stemmed out of that religious circle, which is not uncommon for diasporas. But in 1902, they had a convention in Harrisburg, and they lobbied for choosing and appointing their own bishop, so that American Catholic Church actually couldn't tell them what to do. And for those of you who don't know, care, whatever about religion, that's a huge deal of independence for an ethnic minority, for an immigrant minority in a country. That's a really, really big deal. And that gentleman over there, he's the first bishop. And so there were three main branches, right? There were Catholic, Orthodox, and a little bit of a Protestant church, Ukrainian church here in the United States. And the Protestant movement started, a little bit later, because the traditional 2 Ukrainian churches are the Catholic and the Orthodox. But there were Presbyterian congregations, first in Illinois, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania. Again, just to give you an idea, their impact was so strong as to launch Ukrainian history, culture, and heritage programs at the Bloomfield College and University. It's in Iowa. How do you say that? Dubuque. Okay, I have my Iowa expert there in the back. The University of Dubuque, they have their own seminary that was launched by a Ukrainian Presbyterian congregation in Iowa. Especially after World War II, these waves became a little bit more organized, and so just to give you some numbers, the Ukrainian Catholic Church had about 250,000 people in it, about 80,000 for Orthodox and 30 for Protestant, which are quite significant numbers. some of the elements that we can see to this day in terms of the religious contribution and heritage contribution, other churches that haven't been built in different regions. And just to give you a few examples, this one right here is St. John the Baptist in upstate New York. It's still existing, still available for touring, it's still available for service. Sacred Heart in Johnson City, upstate New York. These two are built in the traditional Carpathian, Western Ukrainian Hutzul style of architecture. This is Church of Immaculate Conception in Philadelphia, Ukrainian Catholic, founded by Ukrainian Catholics. This one is St. Volodymyr and St. Olha in Chicago, in the Ukrainian village in Chicago, which looks even more impressive when you look at what's going on inside. An absolute masterpiece of architecture and art. And this is St. George's Church in New York, in East Village, in the Ukrainian community there, as well as St. Andrew's Church in New Jersey. So these were all built by Ukrainian congregations here in the United States. In terms of civic contributions, Ukrainians do like politics. We like to get ourselves busy with what's going on. We like to be a part of things. We like, you say, we have a saying, where there's two Ukrainians, there's a fight. Because we are opinionated, we like to talk to people about what we think and things like that. So Ukrainian civic life in the United States was quite active. And in 1915, the Ukrainian National Association was founded, which is still active to this day, provides a tremendous amount of resources for Ukrainian diaspora as well as people who would like to learn more about Ukrainian heritage. It was at that time when this huge nationally conscious Ukrainian community began emerging, and some things they had a lot of reading rooms established all over the East Coast. They had choirs, bands, orchestras that were touring the country and were quite popular. Some of them were smaller in churches where people sort of just were like, well, you're not very good, but you're singing Ukrainian songs, so we're going to tolerate you. But some of them were quite good. They had a lot of heritage classes. They were having their own periodicals, such as Svoboda, which means liberty in Ukrainian. And they also established what they call Narodna Pomich, which is Ukrainian National Aid Association. And it was this association that actually did a lot after World War I and World War II. They were lobbying on behalf of Ukrainian interests when the whole division of Europe after World War II was happening. They were very heavily lobbying pro-Ukrainian. The Displaced Person Act, they collected money and sent humanitarian help and got those third waivers into the country after World War II. They were sponsoring Ukrainian concerts in Carnegie Hall and Ukrainian choirs touring all over the country. They have still a lot of scholarships for Ukrainian students and for those American students who would like to study Ukrainian culture. They financed 2 volumes of an English language encyclopedia on Ukraine, on its history and culture. They are the ones who are holding, I don't know if any of you heard about Soyuzivka in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. It's a huge Ukrainian cultural center. There's stuff going on there all the time. It's, I believe it's membership only, but they have started back in the 40s, but all of these are still active today. The Svoboda, the Ukrainian Weekly, Veselka, that's for kids. It's called Rain. It means rainbow. It's for little children. And also annual almanacs about the life of Ukrainian community in the United States. And those are quite widely spread, so to say, in the United States to this day. This is a picture of Soyuzivka, so you can see a little bit. It's beautiful. It's designed, the main building is designed in the Ukrainian style. It has a hutzul, or the Western Ukrainian dressed men with the traditional musical instruments sitting in front of it. They do dances, they do meetings and conferences and things like that. To this day, also another organization that exists, and they were actually the ones helping me do my dissertation, is the Taras Shevchenko Scientific Society. They're based out of New York City, East Village. They keep archives, they do talks, they do conferences, any sort of activity that you can imagine to promote the knowledge about Ukraine and Ukrainian culture in New York and the entire United States. Some of the states in which Ukrainians have served, I don't think there's a Ukrainian in the Congress just yet, but we'll get there. But New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Indiana, Illinois, and of course North Dakota, those traditional states where Ukrainian communities are quite large and influential, had people of Ukrainian origin in serving in the state legislature, which I think is really cool. And we will get to Senate. And finally, some of the cultural contributions, and as I said, there were a lot of bands and a lot of choirs and theater groups were sort of the two main art forms that we as Ukrainians, we love to sing. Like, we just sing all the time. I don't, I'm terrible. I'm like the black sheep of my nation. But most of the people, you know, there's these, Ukrainian culture is believed to be the one that has the largest number of folk songs. Over 1 million of individual, unique folk songs. So we love folk music. Mandolin orchestras, marching bands. Most of all this movement started out of Pennsylvania and then spread into New York, Baltimore, and Chicago, and some of those Ukrainian communities. One of the very famous directors in Ukraine, Alexander Koshets, he arrived into United States with his choir around 1912, and he toured the entire country as well as in Canada. And these are just some of the rave reviews that that particular choir got. There's nothing remotely approaching it in any choral singing to which the Western world is accustomed. And that's the Boston Union transcript. Marvelous precision of attack that defies description. So these are some of the things that people said about the Ukrainian choir singing. Anybody a fan of Carol of the Bells? You know Carol of the Bells? Like the Carol of the Bells? You know, really chimey, very, very, very nice. You know it's Ukrainian? No? Uh-huh. Originated as a Ukrainian Christmas carol, brought into the United States. Somebody wrote English words for it. Thank you very much. However, in the original, this is what it sounds like. You get the idea, right? It was, if you Google Carol of the Bells and go to its Wikipedia page, the first thing it'll tell you is that's a Ukrainian folk carol that has been adapted with English text and has been adopted as one of the big American Christmas carols. Some of the other big cultural contributions happened through the masters of dance who have arrived to the United States, and one of the probably most famous people was Vasily Vramenko, who's called the father of Ukrainian dance. He arrived to the United States in 1928. By 1936, he had 50 dance troupes that were under his direction and under his guidance, which you have to be very good to get that much of a following in a foreign country after being there for like 8 years. It's a huge success. And so when he would get sometimes all of his dancers together and do these mammoth performances with 2 choirs and an orchestra and all of his dancers, and in case you thought that title, I came up with it, you know, what this country needs is more Ukrainians. No, I didn't. That was by Henry Beckett from the New York Times, who saw one of Abraменko's performances and said that, you know, this dance routine is absolutely unparalleled. What this country needs is more Ukrainians. Maybe then Americans will learn how to dance. So that's, in case you were gonna bombard me, like, how dare you say that? I didn't say it. I take all the responsibility off of myself. But probably the peak of his performance was in 1935, when him and his core dance troupe were invited to the White House to perform in front of Lady Roosevelt for their annual White House Easter egg hunt, which is considered, you know, an incredible level of recognition to be invited for a private performance into the White House. So this is his troupe that was performing in the White House, and you can see it has from adult dancers all the way to little kids, which I think is really cute. You can imagine little kids dancing in the White House for Easter egg hunt, like dressed up in like cute traditional clothing. So these are just the 3 aspects that I wanted to touch upon and share with you. Certainly there is much more that, and many more contributions that I could talk about. There's the contributions of Ukrainian press and publications and Ukrainian scholars who are coming, unlike myself, working in educational institutions across the entire United States. The Ukrainian American woman, we've moved this country very, very far. And Ukrainian women, just like Ukrainians like to be civically active, Ukrainian women are a whole next level of being civically active. So that's a whole like different and hour-long presentation about Ukrainian women. Also the business and professional life and the kind of, you know, stores and that have been open, and lawyers and doctors of Ukrainian origin who have done really great things here in this country. Ukrainians in the U.S. military wasn't just the Civil War, you know, Ukrainian people of Ukrainian origin participated in multiple other engagements of the U.S. Army. And also, certainly, we can talk at length about current diaspora activism and the current groups helping those in Ukraine and political activism that's going on with civic unrest in Ukraine and all these groups trying to send humanitarian help and just any sort of support. So there's definitely a lot more to cover, but thank you so much, and whenever you have a free moment in your day, please pray for Ukraine. Thank you.